Hello and welcome to the CFB Super Show. I am your host, Walter Waddell, and we are brought to you by the world-famous FTN Network here on Saturday morning, September 23rd. We are officially in the muck, grinding through week 4 of the CFB season. It's crazy how fast it's going. We're already into conference play here. Pricing is going to start to normalize. It's just really crazy how fast time is going. And college basketball, literally right around the corner. I can see it. It's in the distance here, coming towards us as we speak. All right, what we do here on the live before lock CFB show is rehash the slate, talking about cores, any injury news, relevant news that is, and answer any questions that you might have, whether that's player A or player X, or strategy questions, how I'm doing, have I slept, any of that kind of stuff. We can chat. This is the show that is guided by you, the audience, which continues to support the Super Show in droves, which we do really appreciate. So thank you very much for that. Good morning, T9X78, my brother or sister. All right. So we have our 14-game slate here on DraftKings. The bit of relevant news that is worth tracking, at least, and this is a slate where it's really kind of everything condensed to the afternoon set of that slate. There's a few plays on the early morning that we're definitely on board with, but we're really kind of putting a lot of our eggs in the afternoon basket. With the BYU running back situation, you have Aiden Robbins, who has not been considered 100% for a few weeks now and is still not considered that way. The emergence of the youngster LJ Martin has given the BYU coaching staff the confidence to take it easy with Robbins, who transferred over from UNLV with the expectations of being a workhorse RB1 back. But injuries and stuff of that nature just hasn't allowed that to happen. We saw LJ Martin against Arkansas, and they gutted that win out. 23 carries for him, just a 77 yards, so it didn't have a great YPC, but he did score twice. 25 touches, clearly 4-9 against Kansas. This is a game that has some definitive shootout potential, high scoring potential. Of course, everybody's going to be looking at Colorado, Oregon for good reason, but we have this BYU Kansas game. We have TCU, SMU, and we have Texas Tech, West Virginia, all with fantasy goodness and scoring potential. But that BYU Kansas game and the TCU SMU game are a little bit less rostered, at least projected rostered by the masses. And Texas Tech, obviously, with their offense, usually people gravitate towards them, but it isn't the most ideal situation playing against a pretty feisty West Virginia defense. So I'm not so sure I want to really stack that game either. I'll be a little bit underweight there. So the LJ Martin play, certainly we need some value. There are a lot of pricier options. As I mentioned, DK and FanDuel, especially on FanDuel, have done a good job here in week 4 with pricing. There are still a few erroneous salaries, but for the most part, we don't have as many free squares. Obviously, Rasheen Ali is still too cheap to get away from, but he's not 4.8. And there's some real decisions that have to be made. The value receiver is up in the air today. There's there's a couple of guys I could see really just putting up a really big score, but also, kind of dropping the ball and detonating in a poor way in your lineup. So there's just some volatile value that we need to be aware of here. But the BYU running back situation, they're cheap and something that we want to obviously monitor to see what happens there. It does sound like Cam Rising is going to continue to be out still. He was, they were really taking it slow with him with the expectation that he was going to be back for this game against UCLA, but as of now, it looks like they're going to continue to go with Nate Johnson. Utah is just a mess, until Brant Kuthi gets back and is able to definitively play, and he's super cheap, sub 4K. He's really going to be the only one that I have interest in this team for now, so I'm really staying away from them anyways. But for those of you looking at that for betting purposes, props, any of that stuff, Cam Rising likely not going to go. Weather issues in the Miami game. Now, last time Miami was on the slate, and there were projected weather issues, it ended up being a absolute fantasy bonanza. Points were scored in droves there against Texas A&M, a 48-33 win. And if you stacked it, which a couple of our subs had the wherewithal to do, you ended up binking and hitting very, very well. So the weather here looks worse, and the Temple Miami game certainly has 3, 4, 5 options in it that look pretty good, but it's going to be tough to really go there. But we have some time to analyze that further and see how that weather goes. But that may drop down some of that rostership on Miami that we were expecting, especially with the group of Restrepo, Young, and George. Let's see. What else do we have here on my short list? Alabama, not really that exciting. Quarterback situation, Milroe back in the house. Don't really care for that one too much, but that's the uncertainty. Ole Miss still has a ton of injuries with their pass catchers in that one as well. Allie Jennings appears to be out or extremely doubtful. And obviously we know Travis Hunter of Colorado is already out. Okay, so I think that is majority of the relevant injury news. All right, let's get into it. The 14-game main slate, and we're obviously talking about FanDuel as well. Want to rehash the current core that I'm sitting on both sides, just to see where my head is at. On the DraftKings side, eating a lot of that chalk. Bo Nix at quarterback, expensive, but obviously we know Colorado's defense, despite even when they had Hunter, they're still being scored on a bunch. The second that he got injured and had to come out, they were really struggling to defend the pass. Colorado took advantage with their tight end. There's just a lot of upside here for Bo Nix. And I do think Oregon, to perhaps, if you want to play the whole, they want to shush some of this super mega hype surrounding the Colorado program, we could see them completely turn Bo Nix loose. We haven't quite seen that. The Heisman chatter for Bo Nix hasn't been as prevalent the last couple of weeks. Hasn't had a 30 fantasy point performance on DraftKings yet. But, obviously Portland State, a huge blowout, blew the doors off of Hawaii. And then the Texas Tech game in which he had 29, just basically 30, threw the ball 44 times, 359 yards, just the 2 touchdowns, and then he did rush for 46 yards. We haven't quite seen that dual threat upside from him just yet, as he has 11 carries for 60 yards, but this will be one where I do think they turn him loose. I think Nix does go ahead and throw for 300-plus yards and probably 3 touchdowns, and I think he gets one on the ground as well, possibly more. So I think that fading Bo Nix in single entry or your main lineup is not egregious by any means, but it could be considered the buzzword around the show that we use, gross negligence. I have been a Bo Nix fan dating back to Auburn when he was awful a lot, but I just don't see how he doesn't put up a huge number. Colorado State's quarterback last week against the Buffs really looked like, I've been using the name Johnny Unitas a lot, but he was, looking fantastic, especially in that second half where he just couldn't be stopped. Almost 400 yards for Nicolosi. So pretty wild. Chandler Morris, who I love, was very good against them as well. So I have to imagine that Nix puts up at least 30, but I would actually be surprised and probably disappointed if he didn't eclipse 40 fantasy points here as well. Second member of the core, again, very boring, very chalky, but sometimes it really is just that easy. Devin Neal of Kansas, and you see the pricing disparity between DraftKings and FanDuel. 5.9 on DK, 11K on FanDuel. His touchdown equity is massive. I continue to just throw his anytime touchdown prop out there. It's up to like minus 250, 270 on DraftKings. Throw it in with something else that you're betting. It's just, I don't know. I'm going to keep betting him and keep using him until he fails us. And at this point, 5.9K is just way too cheap to not go back to him. It's not a huge pricing error. It's not like he's sitting there at 4K where it's like, what the hell were you thinking? But obviously he needs to be above 7K. And after this slate and what I expect to be a pretty dominant performance of at least 100 yards or multiple touchdowns, we'll finally get his price up there. But he's been fantastic. 6 touchdowns to date, 5 rushing, 1 receiving. He's playing right around, or so far has played 52% of the snaps for Kansas. And he's just been really efficient with those touches. Highshaw is still getting a decent chunk of the work as well. But Neal's just been a touchdown machine. And Highshaw has also done really well, been efficient scoring touchdowns. So got to play Devin Neal. And then the third member of the core, ordinarily we'd be like quarterback, running back, receiver, right? But I think there is a lot of room for interpretation for how you attack the wide receivers on this slate. So I do have listed on the third member of my core that I submitted is Rasheen Ali. Again, not priced super bad at 4.8, but he's obviously way too cheap. There's just a ton of usage there for him in this offense. He will catch passes. They will force feed him the ball often, playing over 80% of the snaps. So just not leaving the field. And 63% of the total carries for this Marshall football team. The only reason really he's not getting 100% of the carries is because of the fact that Cam Fancher is a bit of a dual threat and will, scramble at times. But right now, through those first couple of games, Ali's returns are gaudy. 222 yards, 5 touchdowns. I'm expecting a relatively strong performance out of him. So I'm just going to go ahead and eat the chalk on those 3 plays and then try to beat the rest of the field with those wide receivers, where we have a lot to talk about there, which we'll get into that in a second. On the FanDuel side, obviously more games. They have a little bit different of a slate, a more expanded slate. So with LSU on that slate, I think you got to keep going to Jaden Daniels. Just going to score rushing touchdowns, going to pass. I mean, there's just so much to like about Daniels. And if you're going to play him, you might as well go ahead and either use Brian Thomas, who feels relatively cheap on FanDuel, or for more, a couple thousand more, Malik Neighbors, who we know was capable of blowing up and it was going to come soon. It just happened to go down last week. So you can kind of swerve a little bit, go back to Thomas with the rest of the field a little bit down on him, but he is relatively cheap there. And then Damian Martinez, this is the battle. This is the true 2024 Pac-12 championship, Oregon State versus Washington State. There is a lot to like in this one, but Damian Martinez coming in at 8.4 on FanDuel, that's just kind of a silly price because you look at it, yes, $11K for Devin Neal, $10K for Bucky Irving, Imani Bailey sitting there at 9.2, Audric Estime, who's been really good at 9.1, Jordan James of Oregon, who, playing behind Irving and doing stuff, 9K, Trey Day sitting there at 8.9, Harvey at 8.7. Like, there's a lot of guys above Damian Martinez who certainly should be. It's not egregious, but I mean, in what world are we paying for RJ Harvey at 8.7, who's a good play? He's okay against Kansas State, over Damian Martinez for less, or Trey Henderson against that really vaunted Notre Dame defense at 8.9 compared to, again, Damian Martinez, who is relatively cheap at 8.4. So on FanDuel, that's where we're headed and playing a lot of those guys. Now, the receiver situation, so, we're eating the chalk on quarterback. We're eating it on running back. There is, again, room for interpretation for your second quarterback. Right now, I'm seeing either a lot of Chandler Morris, who I'm fairly high on, as usual. Castellanos from Boston College, sitting there at 5.9 on DraftKings, gives you a fair bit of salary savings there to run him. Or Tyler Shuck, who sits there at 8.1 for Texas Tech. I'm not as high on him as the rest of the industry is, just because I think it could be a little bit uglier than people expect. But the nice thing about Shuck is the volume's going to be there. Even if he ends up completing less than 60% of his passes, we're probably looking at 35 to 40 attempts at minimum, which makes him a really, really strong play at 8.1. So don't get me wrong there. I'm not sitting here saying, hey, we need to fade this dude because, he's going to have a bad game. The volume's going to take him there. And just how much better of a game is he going to have than Chandler Morris for more? How much better of a game than Castellanos with his rushing upside? So that's kind of where my head is at. Or maybe even just, hey, I want to find this salary. I'm running a lot of GPPs today. I'm going to go in this large field. I'm going to throw Dylan Gabriel out there at 9.1, who we know is super overlooked every single week. He's usually priced appropriately fair, borderline a little bit too high sometimes, but on the road against Cincinnati, there's going to be volume for him as well. Masterful control of this offense, a variety of weapons around him that he has instant chemistry with and trust, and a good enough running game that defenses can't, sell out to stop him all the way. So, a variety of ways, or you could just, pay up for Shedeur Sanders and Bo Nix and worry about the rest later. So let's jump over. We'll circle back around to running backs as well, but let's jump into wide receivers, where I think obviously the slate, this will probably be where it's won with the different receivers. Now let's start with the obvious, which is Oregon and Colorado. You're going to see 1 to 2 receivers from that game, and probably a fair amount of lineups if you play high dollar, if you play single entry, all of that stuff, double ups. It makes way too much sense, right? But you're not just going to be able to come in here and say, hey, I'm playing Troy Franklin, I'm playing Bo Nix, I'm playing Xavier Weaver, I'm playing Bucky Irving, I'm playing Shedeur Sanders. Like, that's not going to happen unless we just play a bunch of 3K guys out there that, hey, if they get 0, whatever. Like, for a GPP, maybe we could do that. I don't know. So you're not going to just be able to stuff all these guys in. So number one, Sanders is going to be thrown by the wayside by the masses, and people are going to play Bo Nix with Troy Franklin, who sits there at 6'9". And Troy Franklin obviously has been very good. In the past, it's been really kind of almost borderline easy to fade Oregon receivers because there were so many different mouths to feed. The target share was somewhat spread out, but you could tell the relationship was there and developing between Nix and Franklin. And to start the season, that's absolutely what's happened. 17 catches on a team high, 25 targets, 292 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So I think that's where people probably start. They're WR1, Troy Franklin. This is what we're doing. I like the idea of saving $1,000 and going down to Tez Johnson, similar to what we did the other night on the Coastal Carolina showdown with Jared Brown for cheaper. Now, he didn't actually end up playing all that well and had some missed opportunities, and Sam Pinckney ended up outperforming him, but the logic was there, those two being such similar players, at least production-wise, that it made sense to save that money. I think we're in a similar situation here with these top 2 guys on Oregon. And then you could even maybe get away with running some of the lesser, production for name guys, like Gary Bryant, the USC transfer, who is starting to come on. Trayshawn Holden, who hasn't quite yet blistered a slate, although the Hawaii game was kind of his reintroduction to people like, hey, this is the Alabama transfer. I had forgotten about what happened to him. Wow, this guy's in Oregon now. Okay. 4 catches, 63 yards, 2 touchdowns. So there are other guys in this offense still to feed. Terrence Ferguson, the tight end, who has 8 targets. He's still milling around there. We know Bucky Irving's going to get some receptions and targets in this passing game. But for the most part, I think it's a safe bet if we try to keep our main team exposure for receivers on this Oregon squad to Troy Franklin or Tez Johnson. I think Gary Bryant is okay if you end up going there, but Bryant, he's $5K. That's a cheap enough price to do so. But I think he's more of a GPP asset than he is a main team guy. So I think the decision comes down to Troy or Tez. Now, I want to save that $1K and go to Tez Johnson. When you look at the actual targets, Troy 25, Tez 16. So we're giving up some usage, surely. They have the same amount of touchdowns, yardage, 300 for Franklin to 155 for Tez. Again, we're seeding some production there, and 11 catches to 17. But both are playing a tremendous amount of snaps. Both are highly involved in this offense, and Bo Nix is looking to them quite a bit. And Tez is a guy that we saw him at Troy, capable of putting up big games, big numbers, big seasons. 856 yards last season, 55 catches. A year before that, he had 66 and 712. Definitely fitting into this offense and playing well. So my preference right now is to save that money with Tez Johnson. It may not work out, but I do believe the logic there is sound. And if we can get him to produce to at least the same amount of X value return, then we feel pretty damn good about saving that 1K and trying to use that. Maybe that gets us a third running back like an Imani Bailey into our lineups that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to get. On the Colorado side, it's even trickier. With Travis Hunter out, that's, already clear to see if anyone's paying attention. I know people are on Colorado, that Weaver and Horn really kind of stepping ahead of Hunter in terms of targets anyways. Both are playing over 80% of the snaps on offense. Anyhow, now you remove Hunter from the equation. They're going to be on the field the entire time. Targets are going to be flying left and right in their direction. a lot of routes run. These are the two guys to safely target. But again, they're coming in expensive, and we can't just mindlessly plug in a 7-3 Horn or a 7-2 Weaver, especially not together, or with Franklin. We're going to have to make some tough decisions here. We do have the option. I know the tight end Michael Harrison, who was a mismatch for Colorado State last week, ended up really blistering that slate and producing pretty well. But I think we can get away with taking Dawson. Tarvarish Dawson Jr., who has 12 targets, 11 receptions, 110 yards, and a touchdown. He will slide in there and get some more looks, some additional usage, if you will. Already, since transferring over from Auburn, been targeted pretty heavily recently. He has 9 targets in the past 2 games and had the 5-catch, a 60-yard performance last week. And in the game against Nebraska, he had the touchdown catch. Certainly going to be involved, not to the level of Weaver Horn, but he's also not nearly as expensive as them either. And I know Javon Antonio got the yellow no contact jersey off. So he's there at 4.8, expected to get some burn as well. But at 4.6, we can get Dawson, and we can feel okay. If we're not able to play Horn or Weaver in our main lineup, we shouldn't feel like we have to give up or going into the slate overmatched by the rest of the field. Dawson could very well walk away with an 8-catch, 100-yard touchdown performance. Could very well have 2 catches for 30 yards and no touchdowns as well. But we have that value, which is very, very spotty around the slate for receivers. There are some other options we'll talk about here in a second. But as far as Colorado value goes, you do have Dawson. Running backs in this game, Dylan Edwards acts more as a receiver, but 6'7" is a stiff price to pay. Alton McCaskill will be playing, getting his debut today. He's 3.8. Now, that would have been the value du jour, but how much is he actually going to play? Are they going to throw him right out immediately? Is he going to, get his feet wet and that's it? Might he punch it in once or twice from the goal line? There's a lot of varying outcomes there. So I don't know that I'm going to be that risky with McCaskill, even though the 3.8 discount is very nice. But we just, on a slate like this where I'm expecting a lot of points, I don't think even at 4K can we afford to take a bagel from this spot. It's just the running back spots and are just too valuable this time because we're not playing 4 running backs, and we borderline might even have to play 4 receivers this week because of how the great options that we have. So that's my Colorado, Oregon spiel. The Miami receivers with the weather, that's going to make it tough. Otherwise, I think we would have seen a fair amount of ownership, and we still might. People aren't really paying attention to weather reports, or, we get some favorable news. I think we see a decent amount of ownership on a guy like Jacoby George, who's sitting there at 5.1. Xavier Restrepo at 5.8 would be probably my preferred option, but again, we have to pull all the salary in, and then you have Colby Young, who's my favorite GPP option of the 3 at 4 or 5.4. That makes it tough. You do have on the other side of this game Temple, which Dante Wright, if the game does end up working out and it's the weather, be damned, and it ends up like Texas A&M, you have Dante Wright there. Speaking of Colorado State transfer at 4.4. Heavily targeted piece in this offense, and somebody who going into the week I felt was going to be a sneak, but how much do we need to worry about the weather? How much does this affect the actual passing game? And is it going to be a situation where we just need to walk away? So kind of still figuring that out as we go. The other wide receivers to really look at are that people are obviously the Texas Tech guys. There are pretty much 2 that you can expect to see ownership on. That being Miles Price, who is a very reasonable 4.8K, and then Jerran Bradley, who sits there at 5.9. I think we're going to see a very condensed player pool amongst most of the regular players or sharp players, if you will, and you're going to see 20-ish% on probably Bradley and a good 10% plus on Price for those who need value. If you're running those multiple lineups, you're trying to swerve a little bit. You have Trey McCray at 4.7. Nobody's going to roster him. It's only a matter of time before he has a nice little breakout game. But again, might we see West Virginia slow this thing down, get CJ Donaldson the ball, get physical? I don't know how much offensive explosion we're actually going to see here. So there's a lot to worry about there as well, in my opinion. Then you have Several other options like the BYU guys, Isaac Rex, who is one of the most consistent pass catching tight ends in college football right now. Just never leaves the field. 85% of the snaps, basically leads the team in targets with 21. Certainly a bit mispriced at 9.5. We have had a lot of success with cheap under-owned tight ends throughout the last couple of seasons. We've hit on them quite well. And Rex just tends to be that guy that finds the end zone when his targets are quality. And when they get into the red zone, they're looking his way regardless of who is quarterback. So I certainly like Rex there at the sub 5K price point. You have Andrew Anthony as the main pairing partner for me with Dylan Gabriel. So if you go the Dylan Gabriel GPP route, then I think you want Andrew Anthony, who is capable of absolutely blowing past the defense and catching a long play or finding the house, making the house call there on any of his touches. So he's the main guy there. Roman Wilson has been a touchdown machine for Michigan. You guys know we love him. Certainly still playable at sub 6K. And then Jamari Thrash, who is really probably the ultimate GPP receiver because nobody's going to be able to afford him at 6'5", 6'6". That's going to be a forgotten about game. There's certainly going to be some points scored there. And it's one of those ones that I think on a non-Colorado slate, we'd be talking about more, or we would see a lot more people kind of, going in that direction. So Louisville game against Boston College with Castellanos at quarterback. And then on the other side with Thrash, who's sitting there at 6'6", it's a really appealing spot there if you're running multiple lineups because we know how good Thrash is. Plummer's really zeroing in on him. He has a huge target share on this team. He's just a touchdown threat in the red zone, and he's really, really good. So I think we could argue that, hey, he's even mispriced to a degree, being 1K, almost 1K cheaper than Weaver and Horn. Like, let's go with it. Yes, it's not as an alluring, sexy, whatever verbiage and descriptive words you want to use, but Jamari Thrash is certainly in our player pool and somebody that if I had the salary and I ended up there, I'm not going to be looking to change my lineup around. I'm perfectly content with using him. Obviously, Evan Stewart, he's a target hound for Texas A&M. Keon Coleman for Florida State has been an absolute stud. If you want a pairing partner for Castellanos at Boston College, you can never really go wrong with Ryan O'Keefe. Jake Bailey of SMU is my favorite there. And then if, you're going the Ole Miss route because they've got all these injuries, Jordan Watkins and Dayton Wade are still expected to get a fair amount of the targets there. Running backs, it's two for sure, obviously Neal and Ali. And then the decision really becomes, can I fit? If I'm not rolling Chandler Morris, am I playing Imani Bailey? Kind of feel like I have to, but I also don't want to, violate the integrity of the rest of my build, trying to make that fit. Do we just go ahead and take the value piece with LJ Martin in a game against Kansas where I do think, hey, this team just showed they could handle a tough environment against a very good team in Arkansas and come out with not only a win, but a productive, individually productive by their skill players win as well. And Martin headed for 60, 70% of the carries. Bucky Irving, of course, another expensive guy if you can fit him. Jawar Jordan is a sneakier, again, Louisville option who has been super efficient. Not playing all that much more than Guerrero, but he's been just, like I said, really efficient with it. 4 touchdowns, 344 yards on 32 carries. I don't know how much longer that can continue, but he's still in play because of it. Quinshon Judkins of Ole Miss, he hasn't been efficient like he was last year. That's just the, not having Zach Evans around. Defense was really keying in on him. Jackson Dart has been phenomenal, though, because of that extra attention Judkins gets. Like him as a GPP play regardless. He put up, 135 and 2 on Bama last year. And then you have the UCLA group, Carson Steele and TJ Harden, operating in a 1A, 1B situation. I like Steele better there, but they are definitely sharing touches. And then some GPP options. I'm getting a lot of questions about Will Shipley, who is cheap. I'm not ready to use him in my main build necessarily, but his receiving work makes him appealing, and he's going to get fed to a degree. Nate Carter of Michigan State, another guy getting fed. Trey Benson of Florida State, not quite the breakout just yet that people talked about, but still in play there as a GPP guy. And then CJ Donaldson, who they use him all over the field, but going to get a fair amount of work in this one. Got to keep Texas Tech's offense off the field. the way to do that is to chew up the clock, grind it out, and let CJ Donaldson go to work. So I think we see a fair amount of touches for him. All right, let's move on. Favorite cheap wide receiver. So Isaac Rex is somebody I'm looking at there. Obviously, again, like I just mentioned, he's got a lot of touchdown equity in this offense, and he's somebody that's just going to get the ball a ton this year. They're targeting him heavily. So 4.5K for him. If you want, say you go to Morris and you need a cheapie and you want a TCU guy, you get Jalen Robinson at 4K. Now, Jalen Robinson is really, really good. TCU needs somebody out of this endless sea of faces that they have in the receiver room to step up and kind of dominate those touches and be the guy for Morris to look to. When it comes to Jalen Robinson, he's certainly well removed from the production we remember him from the last couple of seasons, right? He is fully capable, came from Oklahoma originally, had almost 1,000-yard season back in 2020 with UCF. Ailments, injuries, kind of robbed him of his 2021 season, wasn't as productive there. Ole Miss, it didn't work out at all. Coming into this one, I was a little worried about that. I thought maybe he was broken or he was never going to be the same. And, 14 targets through the first few games here. Morris definitely kind of zoning in on him. The fact that Jared Wiley, JPR, and Warren Thompson are also getting pretty heavy targets still shows that this offense is very spread out. But it does seem like if anybody will emerge from this group as the alpha, Jalen Robinson is that guy. And he's shown us in the past that he can. So 4K is certainly worth a shot. I was thinking earlier today more GPP side, but with the pricing being a little stiffer for what we want to do, you could go ahead and play Jalen Robinson and kind of just say, you know what, I don't need a pairing partner for Morris, but I do need value. Killing two birds with one stone here. I'm getting a cheap receiver that's going to get looks, and it's a pair with my quarterback. So that's certainly in play. Thoughts on Jefferson and Judkins' price on FanDuel. Now, KJ Jefferson on FanDuel, I'm glad you brought that up, is actually, I considered coring him on FanDuel, 7.5K. Now, I know it's LSU, it's a tough spot. Will Rogers had his struggles, but KJ Jefferson, man, he's going to run. He's got some really good options in the passing game. They have, a few guys in the backfield that can get it done. AJ Green. So that 7.5 price tag is good. I mean, GPP wise, you should certainly be playing a lot of KJ Jefferson over on FanDuel today because that's just way too cheap, borderline disrespectful. I don't know what they were thinking there, especially on FanDuel, where it's kind of hard to get cheap quarterbacks that are really good. Now, Judkins is 7.3, same deal, like a tough road matchup in the SEC on paper, but GPP wise, yeah, why aren't we just playing Jefferson and Judkins on FanDuel and then just loading up everywhere else? Because he's going to get volume. He's going to get work. And he already showed us that he could perform at a high level against this Alabama team. Granted, there's new faces and new places, but Quinshon Judkins is going to erupt. What we've seen out of him the last few games and what we can consider down games, he's still been performing. Not to the level of what we're used to, but he's outplaying a fair amount of running backs. And there's been a lot that have been letting us down so far this season. But you look at it, because of his touchdown equity and because of his ability to contribute as a pass catcher, he hasn't been under double-digit fantasy points at all this year. So absolutely, Quinshon Judkins on FanDuel, along with KJ Jefferson, has to be in consideration. Do you like Andrel Anthony from Oklahoma? Yes, I think he is the number one pairing partner with Dylan Gabriel, and I don't mind running him naked. Well, not naked, but you can see I haven't slept. I don't mind running him without a quarterback. Some receivers are like, you know what, I want to have them in a mini stack, but Anthony's fine to run by himself. Would you take under 56.5 an Ole Miss game? Would you take under in 35.5 an Iowa State game? I don't really. The Iowa State under seems logical, but it's just so low already. I kind of feel dangerous. But I do like the under in the Ole Miss game, and I love the under. You didn't ask, but in Ohio State, Notre Dame, I actually wrote up on the betting side yesterday about that one. And I think the Notre Dame defense and their running game kind of grinds that one through. Kyle McCord, not that he's not built for it, but I think he'll run into a bit of a brick wall there, and I like the under in that one. But I do think Alabama game will be low scoring as well for what it's worth. Random man, favorite quarterback stack outside of Nick's for main build. So my favorite quarterback outside of Nick's on his own is Morris. Favorite stack, and I'm probably taking a cop out here, but I don't want to give you a leverage play just for the sake of being different. Shedeur Sanders and one of Xavier Weaver and Jimmy Horn, right? Like, salary aside, that's the best stack to run. Maybe Sanders with both of those guys, and then you just fade Nix in one of your lineups, and you hope Colorado plays catch up from the middle of the second quarter on, and he throws 55, 60 times. That's a real possibility. So that's my favorite. Sneaky, Castellanos and Ryan O'Keefe from Boston College. That's one that I think people are probably overlooking and should be considered. I think that's probably my favorites. And of course, we've talked at length about the TCU side with Morris and his various receivers. Is playing Bradley without Texas Tech quarterback bad? No, because Shuck could end up struggling a little bit, and Bradley still scores once, scores twice, has 75 to 100 receiving yards, and while Shuck throws for under 300 yards, so it's certainly not bad. I think we'll see a lot of that. I'm looking at the receivers here. Let's get into ownership. That's a good segue, and then we are going to end the show here in about 5 minutes. Just don't want to run us into lock, at the last minute here. I know I have a tendency to be long-winded, so I apologize for that. But let's get into ownership right quick, because I think Bradley's going to end up being a tad bit more higher owned than maybe I was expecting earlier this week. As it stands right now, I think we see Bo Nix, number one most owned quarterback to me. Then we see second Tyler Shuck, Chandler Morris, who should be up there, although he is kind of maybe trending down a little bit. And then Thomas Castellanos, somewhere in between the Morris group and then the quarterbacks behind him, like Dylan Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, Jalen Daniels, that grouping, Tyler Van Dyke, that people aren't really going to be on, somewhere in that range. And then I am seeing a lot of love for Preston Stone. I do not quite share that same amount of love as others. I think TCU, obviously they got wrecked by Colorado. Their defense didn't hold up. They did well against a Houston offense that can put up points. I think TCU will do good, and they'll bother Stone. So I'm not really as high on him, but it does look like he's gaining some more ownership. The running backs, Devin Neal, clearly way up, like stratospheric. Rasheen Ali, stratospheric. And then I think it becomes, who can you afford? It's a race to see, can you afford Bucky Irving? Probably not, depending on what you're doing with the receivers. Amani Bailey's underpriced at 6'4". I really, truly believe if you don't run Chandler Morris, you need to play Amani Bailey. I feel awful about fading TCU completely. I'm not going to do it. And I really think that if you have a lineup right now that you're going to run in the majority of your action, and it has no TCU, you need to take the next 15 to 20 minutes, go back to the drawing board and see what you can do to either A, fit Amani Bailey, or B, go ahead and find Chandler Morris naked, because he's going to get a rushing touchdown, or at least have that opportunity. And he's obviously going to probably, against this SMU team, push for 300 yards. Other running backs that will kind of, so that's the main group of running backs that are going to see ownership. Neal, Ali, Bailey. Irving, I only think, falls behind them because of his price. And then LJ Martin right behind because of how cheap he is. And then it's just a smorgasbord of, Will Shipley, really need to sleep. Carson Steele, CJ Donaldson, like those options that you'll be able to get at 3%, 4%, and 5%. The receiver side, really blatant. The Colorado guys, clearly Franklin, who I expect to be fairly highly owned, and Jerand Bradley, who I expect to be top 5 highest owned wide receiver on the slate. I think we end up getting away using a guy like Tez at lower rostership. I think we get away with using, if we go to an Isaac Rex of BYU for lower ownership, or if we go ahead and pair somebody with Chandler Morris, Jalen Robinson at lower ownership. I don't quite know what to think with the group of Evan Stewart, Ryan O'Keefe, Dante Wright, Jamari Thrash, that grouping. I think it'll be a smattering, anywhere from 5% up to maybe 15% on those various guys. I still think Thrash will be on the lower owned end, which makes him really appealing. But a guy like Ryan O'Keefe, who's at 4.6, I think people look at that and say, hey, Ryan O'Keefe, he's capable of doing some serious damage. I need value. Let me throw him out there. So I think his ownership then balloons up a little bit. And you even have a guy who I haven't really been talking about all that much on the same team in Lewis Bond, who is even cheaper. And I think if people are really feeling up against it, they play him at 3.9, who did score a touchdown last week, has been getting that kind of the line we always talk about for our cheap receivers, 5 catches, 50 yards, sometimes a touchdown, sometimes not. He can do that at 3.9. So I do think we see, people even go that route as well, as they start to feel the pressure here from having so much salary and so many marquee expensive options. We just can't fit them all. We have to make some sacrifices without completely tearing down the integrity of our lineups. All right, LJ Martin and Bradley, or Rex and Carson Steele. I would be LJ Martin Bradley there. And I don't know that's that close. I like Rex a lot. I like Steele a fair amount, but I do think Martin and Bradley has a way better chance of being optimal. I think Carson Steele could either lose touchdowns to Harden, or Utah's defense front line steps up and shows up there, and Steele just doesn't find the end zone, doesn't find room to run, kind of has a bland performance. Rex used to be touchdown or bust, but he's highly targeted, most targeted receiver on the team. So I don't mind that, but just the combination of Martin and Bradley there, it seems too appealing to me. PrizePicks, let's get over to that. The still ones I like the most, the Devin Neal anytime. They have it over on PrizePicks, over 0.5 rushing touchdowns. Until he stops scoring, I'm not going to stop using that prop and betting that prop. Michael Penix, over 3.5 passing touchdowns. The real Heisman, if you know. Bo Nix, over 3.5 passing plus rushing and receiving touchdowns. That's the category they give. I like him for 3 passing touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown at minimum, upside for a hell of a lot more. So I'm all over that. Chandler Morris, over 264.5 passing yards. He will be throwing for 300 yards today. And then Dylan Gabriel, over 262.5 passing yards. He's just going to be chucking it, man. He's going to throw the ball a lot. I have a feeling Gabriel is going to be struggling with accuracy a bit in this one, but I think he's going to have a ton of volume, like 40 plus pass attempts. So he's gotten 300 plus yards on 19 attempts before. So with 40, he should easily eclipse 262.5 passing yards. Anytime touchdowns, I'm still hitting that Devin Neal one again. Let's see what it's at right now. Oh, by the way, I've been getting a lot of questions about Jaheim Bell. Love Jaheim Bell when he was at South Carolina. If you want to go that route and get some exposure to this FSU Clemson game and you can't get to Keon Coleman, Bell makes the most sense. You saw last week, 5 catches, 76 yards, and a touchdown against LSU. He had 2 touchdowns. They use him in tough games. Big body guy, skilled. They will use him. So if you need another cheapie and you're not sure about Dawson, you're not sure about Rex, you don't want to deal with Dante Wright in the weather, Jaheim Bell at 4.6 is going to get targets. He's probably going to get carries. He's going to have an opportunity to score touchdowns. That's what Jaheim Bell does for this Florida State team that is full of weapons. All right. Anytime touchdown scorers. Come on. It's minus 300 now. I think it was like minus 270. So we got to find a pair for that. But I'm still throwing it out there. And then I went over to Colorado and I had bet this yesterday in my prop piece. Jimmy Horn, who is plus 110 anytime touchdown scorer. Now I like taking shots at any of these, really. Weaver sitting there at plus 105. You've got other guys like Gary Bryant plus 100. Tez Johnson's minus 105, Treshaun Holden plus 160, like just a smattering and a sprinkling on all these various anytime touchdown scores in a game that's going to feature 70 plus points. And Oregon theoretically and positively could score 70 plus points all by themselves. So there's going to be a lot of touchdowns here. Those are the props that I'm hitting. All right, final questions if you got them. We're going to wrap it up here, and then we're going to spend the next 12 minutes figuring out the remainder of our lineups. Jamie, thank you very much for the support. Appreciate you guys. It's just been a long week, man. I want to take a second to truly apologize for the tardiness of the main slate. I usually have that one out in the late afternoon. We like to have the Friday slate piece kind of marinate, get its due. And then that main slate comes out, so you have the night to do it. It did come out about 4 hours before lock today, but we had the show as the complimentary piece. We will have a night slate piece coming out here in the next couple of hours as well. Friday morning, something in the real life work realm happened, put me behind for the day, and this is where we're at. I've also not slept very well the last 2 days, but I'm just doing the toughness training for March Madness because we truly won't be sleeping much at all during that time. So I apologize for that. I do appreciate you guys for the continued support, though. Let's go out there. I want to see lots of green screens across all social media and the Discord. Best of luck to all of you. I appreciate it. Expect a night slate article and Discord coverage for the late night slate. I'll be out there grinding with all of you every single touchdown. But first, I'm going to take a nap.